Welcome to the Real Bible Rob podcast. Today I'm going to talk about one of the more emotionally charged aspects of the Gospels, one that responds very differently for women and for men, and that is the stories of Mary and Martha, and the who are the sisters of Lazarus, who was raised from the dead, and also what this story says about the relationship of men and women, also about the audacity of these women, both of these women. These stories, especially, are used very badly for a couple of reasons. One is this idea that oftentimes uh, Mary is shamed or looks like she's shamed, and the Marthas in life who say, "Hey, you're not working hard enough," but also people think that, well, Jesus is shaming Martha because she's saying, no, Mary chose the right one. That's a fundamental misunderstanding of the social context of this passage and some of the language here. So I'd like to clear that up a little bit and show how this story actually really lifts up both women in a very uh, Jesus-like way. Also, how it's related to other stories in the New Testament, but in also the another part of the story, because it's both in Luke and in John. And in the John aspect of the story, it talks about Lazarus. And then at the end of the dialogue that Jesus has with Lazarus, he says, the poor will always be with you. I'm not always with you. And this one verse has been used so badly. It's been used by people who are basically trying to excuse not helping the poor, and by people who just don't think that social justice has anything to do with Christianity, and use it against the poor. So I'd like to clear that up as well. So these are really important story. So let's get into it. I'll start by reading just a little bit from Luke chapter 10, and then explain a couple of words in there and talk a little about social location, and then talk about how it's there are two versions of the story from two different aspects, one from Luke, one from John, of the same account. In Luke chapter 10, you don't really have the background about who Mary and Martha are and Lazarus, whereas in John chapter 11, you have lots of background about who they are, their relationship with Jesus, and everything. So when you put the stories together, you can get a more complete picture. So I'll start with, let's get started then with Luke chapter 10 and Martha and Mary. Starting with verse 38, it says, now they went on their way. He encountered a certain village, which would be Bethany, where a woman named Martha welcomed him. She had a sister named Mary who sat at Jesus' feet and listened to what he was saying. But Martha was distracted by her many tasks, so she came to him and asked, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her, then, to help me. But the Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things, but few things are needed, indeed, only one. Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken away from her. So, this is a very key, and you can see it looks like Jesus, if you take this passage alone, is rebuking Martha for being a busybody and saying, no, Mary, who's the quiet one sitting at his feet, is taking the better part. But that would be a misreading of it to just look at it that way. So I'm going to read a little bit of John chapter 12 to kind of give a little context to this. Starting with verse 1, 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, the home of Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. There they gave a dinner for him. Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those reclining with him. Mary took a pound of costly perfume made of pure nard, anointed Jesus' feet, and wiped them with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. It's important to take both of these together for a couple reasons. One is you can see some things about social location. First of all, Martha is the one that's throwing the party. Lazarus had been raised. If you read in chapter 11, John chapter 11, you get a lot more background on the friendship that Jesus had with these folks, how much he loved them, how much they loved Jesus, some of the danger involved with Jesus being there. He was only 3 miles away from Jerusalem. This is the week before Passover. Jesus was reluctant to come there. But the thing is that Mary, once Lazarus had been raised, once they understand the situation that Jesus was in with his disciples, they throw a grand party for Jesus. And Martha is the host of the party in a way that she's kind of taken charge. And so she's sort of orchestrating all of this. It's interesting, Lazarus was one of those reclining with him. That also is an indication of what kind of party it is. These, they didn't sit in circles and chairs and, and things like that. The way they celebrated in this period, both Jews did, but, of course, Romans did too, is that usually the men got together in a room and they were lying on cushions. They were reclining. And this tells you a little bit about where Mary is. This is really important because if you look at verse 39 of Luke 10, it says that Mary sat at Jesus' feet and listened to what he was saying. That word sat is way underplaying what the real word in Greek is. The word in Greek is not just sat, but it's a word that's parakathisesthai, and that is a very long word that has the sense, and it's a reflexive word. It's not a word that's just a standard indicative word, but it's reflexive, and it literally means in context, it means one who sat herself down, and it's alongside Jesus' feet. This is a much more intentional thing. It's not just that Mary came in and sat down. No, she sat herself down at Jesus' feet in a room filled with men who were at a party. That's not something you did as a first century woman. Uh, and not only the implication here too is then he to listen to what he was saying. She did the act of what a disciple does. She was very audacious to be in that room as a disciple. Now she also brings in, this ointment too, and she fills the air with ointment. But we often receive these words as if she's being submissive by sitting at his feet. And the answer, the if without knowing the Greek, there you could say, oh well, yeah, this looks like a submissive act. No, she puts herself in that room at Jesus' feet like a disciple. She's taking action. So it's very likely, and in fact, the way I interpret this is that Martha was not complaining about Mary for the amount of work that Martha had to do. Because if she did, she would have just said, hey, Mary, come on, I need you, I need your help. And Mary might have complied. But the thing is, it's more she goes to Jesus to kind of release Mary. She may have done this in a way to not embarrass Jesus or the men there. She may have, whispered to Jesus on the side, just say, "Come on, release Mary, get her out of here." Probably more out of embarrassment to say, "Mary, come on, you can't be in there with those men. Don't do it. No, no, don't do it." Uh, she wanted to keep protocol. Remember, she's the host. She's the one that's serving. She's the one that's preparing the food. Yeah, it's true that she may have needed help to do that. And she wanted Mary to be in her traditional role with her to provide that. but it was also this, oh my God, look at what Mary's doing. Look, oh my, we're not supposed to do that kind of thing. So the way that Jesus responds to them is a just beautiful. He does this in many other cases throughout the New Testament where he's put into kind of a social bind between people and he just brings them together. He says, Martha, Martha, you're so worried and distracted by many things. That's actually an acknowledgement of the fact that Martha is doing all the work, that she cares. That's lifting Martha up. It's not rebuking Martha for being busy. It's not the busybody thing that people mostly say. But then he's going to say, but few things are needed. I need you to focus, Martha. Indeed, only one. And that, is a reference to the fact that he's being anointed. About a week later, he's going to be on the cross, and maybe they don't know this yet. Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken away from her. So when he's talking to Martha, he's saying, no, it's okay for Mary to be here. Not only is it okay for Mary to be here, she's invited here. I want her here. She's important in this process, just like you, Martha, are important in this process. You're throwing the party, and she's doing the anointing. Both roles are needed. Both women are lifted up by this. So for us to use it as shaming, it's often used for shaming in two different ways. One is Martha's a busybody and she's not concerned about spiritual matters. She's too busy, being the hostess instead of, seeing what Jesus is really doing. Now, yes, but why Jesus isn't shaming her, he's just redirecting her. In the same way, Mary, you could say it's often used to shame Mary. Well, Mary's, her head's in the clouds. She's not doing her part. She's not working hard enough. A lot of times women will take this as and go, hey, that lazy sister, I'm the one. And it's not just women, of course, it's anyone who does a lot of work around, and it just seems like other people just let things go. I think of the prodigal son's brother like this, right? He's kind of like a Martha. He's saying, "You look at him. He's a bum, and I'm doing all the work. Come on, I should be the one." There may be some of that, but this idea of we see opposites here. This is kind of a Jewish parallelism thing that we often see in this society. And what we're seeing is that he's telling the story. The story is being told to show that Jesus is honoring both women in both the one that's doing the work and being the host, which is an audacious thing, and the one who is anointing and sitting at his feet like a disciple. If anything, you could even say this is, you know what? Martha and Mary, you're both disciples. You're both important to me. That's very much the sense of what we should get out of it. There's no shaming here, not from Jesus at least, but we use it for that. Isn't that sad that we use this wonderful story for that? Then we go to the next part, and that this is where Mary is anointing the feet of Jesus, anointing Jesus with a pound of perfume or ointment made of nard. Nard comes from India. Had to come through the Arabian trade routes. That's why it was so expensive. And this is an enormous amount, probably something like a cup and a half, like 12 ounces of nard. If it was a Roman pound, was likely. And this is ointment that was often used in burial rites, and like the spices that we hear about in burial. The tombs were perfumed, obviously because of the stench, and it was part of this. You can also see how, isn't this interesting? We're kind of parallel here, is that Mary's bringing a pound of nard perfume here to Jesus when her brother was in the tomb, and it even says that you could smell the stench after being in the tomb for 4 days. A chapter before this, kind of interesting comparison there. But what's interesting about this is not so much that she's anointing him, uh, which, like I said, is an audacious act, but it's more the fact that uh, it's kind of like a break the glass moment. Mary's the one that recognizes, out of all these people here, she's the one that recognizes this is when you've got to pop the cork, you've got to break the glass. This party here is so important that it necessitates bringing out the really expensive stuff. And that's what she's doing. Now, as Judas comes and says, come on, that you could sell 12 ounces of this ointment for 300 denarii, which is a whole year's wage for a laborer at that time. Probably something that we would think of in terms of like $50,000 or something like that. A very large amount of money. And why not give it to the poor? Now, the narrator here puts a parenthetical statement in verse 6 and says, this is not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief and he held the common purse and was going to steal what was in it. Um, whether that's just a screed against Judas, it's something that we can be familiar with, right? Is to use the poor to say, we need to not do these things because there are starving children in China. There are poor people that need these resources. We shouldn't be built, but you could even take it one step further. We shouldn't have beautiful sanctuaries or fund libraries or do civic things because we need to take care of the poor. A lot of times when people say things like that, they're not really interested in the poor. They're kind of like Judas, or using that as an excuse. What Jesus comes back with is says, come on, leave her alone. She brought it so that she might keep it for the day of my burial. Interesting. Again, Mary's the one that gets this, how important this moment is. Then we go into the next statement. You always have the poor with you, but you don't always have me. This verse 8, John 12:8, has been used so often by people, plucked out to say, yeah, but the poor will always be there, as if that gives an excuse for not helping the poor. Um, that gives an excuse for denying benefits to the poor. In our world today, we often see that this verse is used for things like, to say the poor shouldn't have welfare or social programs or something like that. It's just so dishonest, and it's such a bad use of this verse. Often done, right? Where somebody will take a particular verse out of context and then they'll just use it as a weapon. Don't do it. It should not be used to shame people or anything, any part of this story. But the other thing about this that's so interesting is that Judas is also, there's this contrasting here. You wonder, in fact, I wonder if this may be the moment when Judas decides, within a week, it's only going to be a few days later, to uh, go to, betray Jesus. Maybe Judas was one of those spies that Jesus was worried about. He didn't want to come to Bethany too early. He wanted to only come to Bethany and the area around Jerusalem during Passover, when there would be thousands and thousands of people camping in the hills. There's a lot more cover for Jesus to come at that time. And if he came too early, then he might have been arrested too early. He wanted to be there for Passover. So, so maybe Judas is like one of those spies, one of those people that would betray Jesus. And maybe that's what's going on here. And maybe this is where Judas, kind of goes, look, he doesn't even listen. What's wrong with Jesus? Maybe he also realizes that Jesus is going to not lead an insurrection, not going to make them powerful, all of those things, because Jesus is already talking about how he's going to be sacrificed. Jesus already has a very strong sense that by going into the walls of Jerusalem in a couple of days, that he's going to lose control of his freedom and that he will then be arrested. It's just a matter of time. And he could say, you know what? This is a big moment in history. This is this is this is a time to break the glass. This is a time to open the bottles. This is a time to have one last party before uh, before what's going to happen to me. So so Jesus is saying, I'm inviting you to join me. And look at Martha. Thank God for Martha. Martha is the one that's throwing this party. She's doing all the work. Thank God for Mary. She's the one that's anointing me and getting me ready. She's the only person in this whole group of people that gets what this is really about. Can't you see how important this is? So I think that that's why these two this story that we see from two different angles, and especially the way it's so misused. If we can just back up a little bit and just see it from that first century point of view and from Jesus' point of view of uplifting these women, not shaming them, that they both play very, very important roles and that the people in this story is not Lazarus. The important point are not even the other disciples, but these two women and what central roles they play. Notice too here is that this is before the triumphal entry, they call it. This is just before he goes into Jerusalem. Uh, and then a week later, afterwards, at resurrection, it's going to be women that uh, discover that he's gone. It's going to be the women that believe strongly enough. Notice that also Mary Magdalene will have spices and preparing the body. The women are preparing the body. Here, this Mary, is preparing Jesus before. Notice the parallels there. The women play the most important roles in these stories here. It's the men that do the denying and the betraying and the scourging of Jesus, but it's the women that are the constant through Passion Week, through the crucifixion, through resurrection. It's these women that keep things going and keep perspective, the right perspective, not only just doing the work, but also being the ones that understand what's really going on here. So I think we can take this story and just, lift that up and see once again, here's Jesus seeing the big picture, pointing out people who see the big picture, and uplifting everybody at the same time. Isn't that great? So, with that, I say, you know, people say lots of things about the Bible, especially these couple of verses that they use so badly that aren't really there. And with that, I say, God bless you.